that lazy these days that it was easier for them to call his company than to follow a cord? The answer was yes. Unfortunately, the world he lived in was full of morons that never ceased to amaze him. Life became stale, for lack of a better word. He settled into his droll existence, fixing computers during the day and escaping into the fantasy worlds he had wanted to help build at night. It was bittersweet every time a new game came out. While he loved playing them, it was also a reminder of what his life should have been. How did the people who landed these jobs get in? He wondered. Did they have connections? Was his portfolio really shit and he just didn't know it? He had asked several of his friends, and they'd always seemed impressed by his work, but perhaps those opinions were biased or they were just trying to be nice. He wasn't sure he cared anymore. Life hadn't dealt him the hand he had wanted, so he just had to play the cards he was given. He still had his email notifications set up to tell him every time a new gaming job was posted, but he never had much hope when applying to them. Why would he when he knew what to expect? Form letter after form letter telling him they had found a candidate better suited for the position. He had grown numb to reading them. Half of the time he didn't even open the emails. Why should he when the first visible line in the preview said, "Thank you for your interest. We're sorry to inform you." Yeah, I'm sure you're really sorry. Radical Interactive wasn't a gaming company, which is probably why they hadn't just passed over his application when it landed on their HR desk. Their target market was the education and medical industries, designing software that utilized the advanced VR systems for teaching hands-on application. That wasn't particularly exciting to Will. What was exciting was that they had mastered the most realistic rendering of items in the VR world thus far. They only promoted the best of the best graphic designers to work for them, which meant that Will had a real chance of getting his name out there if he could advance in the company. Will was so used to getting rejection letters that he almost deleted the response email from Radical Interactive when he first saw it. He had ticked the box next to it with all the other junk he received on a daily basis. It wasn't until right before he was about to click the delete button that he noticed the preview said, "Congratulations." When he opened the email, he thought his heart might burst through his rib cage. He had landed a phone interview. How exciting was that? The first time a company had even given him a chance to prove himself worthy. The rest seemed like a dream. To be honest, Will hadn't held much hope that he'd make it all the way through the interview process. Even though Radical Interactive wasn't a gaming company, positions were still highly sought after. He nearly shit himself when they raved about his portfolio and wanted to take him on immediately. Now, he was finally going to get a shot at his dream. He zoomed through the paperwork, scribbling his name so quickly that it was barely legible on most pages. His eyes scanned over the documents, the W-9 and the non-disclosure agreements and all the other red tape that comes with starting a new job. He'd seen similar forms many times before at other jobs he'd worked at. It wasn't until he reached the very last form that he gave pause. Consent to beta test The Realm. If he remembered correctly, The Realm had been Radical Interactive's maiden voyage into the VR MMORPG world. Back then, the company was just a startup, and they didn't have the funds to hire the best designers in the business. The game was blocky, glitchy, and had an underwhelming response when pitted against the competition. Sales of the game never really spiked, and it was practically forgotten before it even gained ground. The company nearly went under from the failure of the project. That's when they shifted their focus to smaller applications, focusing on quality for their short educational games instead of spreading their resources thin to build a giant immersive world. For a moment, Will was excited that they might be trying to revamp and revive the game. That was a project he'd definitely like to work on. But as he read down the paper, he realized that they weren't planning on a wide release. Instead, they were testing the game on patients with brain issues, working with the medical industry in the hopes that they could use the game to repair damaged parts of the brain to make patients whole again. Will just couldn't imagine how the blocky rendering could do anything but frustrate the people subjected to it. The gameplay videos he'd seen were less than impressive, which is why...